From an island haunted by dolls to strange occurrences on an island, here are 8 of the creepiest places in the world. Number 8. The Dolls of Nagoro. In the tiny village of Nagoro, Japan, a local artist has found a unique way to keep her memory of bygone days alive. This practically abandoned village is now populated by creepy dolls. As residents moved away or died, Tsukimi Ayano became saddened by the slow death of the village she loved so much. But she was inspired after creating a scarecrow for her garden that looked like her late father to create similar replicas of former residents of the tiny village. She began to create life-sized dolls modeled after former local residents and placed them around the village in various states of action as a way to remember everyone. After creating these toys for over a decade, there are now 350 dolls throughout the village, ranging from utility workers to fishermen, and a classroom with students. There are even some sitting by the road, waiting for you to pass by. With only 40 people remaining in the residential community, Nagoro has become a strange tribute to past residents. But for those who are unsettled by the sight of lifeless dolls, you may want to steer clear of this ghost town. Number 7. Palermo Catacombs. This is a different kind of creepy. A macabre spectacle displaying the customs and traditions of the Palermo society has resulted in one of the most impressive and creepy places to visit in the world. The Capuchin Catacombs of Palermo are a unique heritage site that gives us a peek at Palermo the way it was from the 17th to the 19th century. Located in Sicily, the catacombs display the practice of mummification and the solemn tradition practiced by the ancient Sicilian society. Originally built as a simple cemetery to bury the monks of the monastery, the Capuchin friars were the original inhabitants buried in mass graves under the altar of St. Anne. But as the community grew, they started to run out of space, and excavations began to create a larger cemetery behind the main altar. Using existing ancient caves, officials decided to transfer the already interred monks. But when they exhumed the corpses of 45 friars, they found the bodies were naturally mummified and preserved so well that they had not decomposed, and their faces were still recognizable. Believing this was an act of God, the Capuchins decided to display and adore the bodies in niches along the walls of the corridor of the cemetery instead of burying them. From the 17th to the 19th century, thousands of people, particularly the wealthier citizens of Palermo, were still able to gain burial in the catacombs. The friars had perfected a mummification process that later became a status symbol, as well as a way to preserve the status and dignity of loved ones once they passed on. Closed in 1880, the cemetery became a sort of museum of death, allowing visitors to see this peculiar celebration of both life and death. What's scarier to you? Dolls or human remains? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button and join us if you haven't already. Number 6. SAGADA hanging coffins. A small group of people in the village of SAGADA, Philippines have been practicing a strange burial ritual for centuries. Instead of burying their relatives in the ground, they put them into small coffins and hang them off the side of a cliff. A tribe of mountain people, the locals known as Igorots, originated from the northern provinces of the Philippine archipelago. Folks in this village actually craft their own coffins as they get older, preparing for their own eventual death. If they're too weak or too sick to make a coffin, family members will step in to handle the morbid business. After death, it is time for an unusual burial custom. Curling the body up into a fetal position, they're placed into the casket. At that point, their coffins are wrapped in a blanket and tied with rattan leaves, and then carried in a procession to the cliff. After the procession, the corpse is placed in the coffin and nailed to the side of the cliff. But the practice isn't for everyone. Village elders must fulfill certain criteria to get this ritual funerary burial, and the younger generations are not practicing this custom as much, because due to the strong Catholic presence in the Philippines, more Western traditions are taking over. Practiced by the SAGADA people for over 2,000 years, some of the coffins are well over a century old, which results in them eventually deteriorating and falling to the ground. So why did they hang their coffins from the side of a cliff? The locals believe that by burying their dead higher, they had a greater chance of the spirit reaching a higher nature and the afterlife. What an unusual and fascinating tradition. Number 5. Island of the Dolls. 50 years ago, a man named Don Julian Santana left his wife and child and moved on to a remote island in Mexico. Why Don Julian decided to leave his family is unknown, but when he was there, he said that he found the body of a young girl who had drowned there and believed her spirit continued to haunt the place. For the rest of his life, Don Julian spent his time paying tribute to the girl by hanging mutilated dolls throughout the island. Some believe he did so because he found the drowned girl's doll in the water with her, and he hung it on the tree to show respect. After becoming obsessed with hanging more and more dolls, he continued to do so, believing each was possessed by the spirit of other dead girls. No one knows why or how he was able to get so many dolls, but he said he found most of them in the canals around where he lived or in the garbage. But he didn't clean them up or fix them before hanging them. Instead, he hung the rotting, empty-eyed dolls covered in dirt in trees around the island. Even though the mangled remains of baby dolls and severed heads hanging from branches decomposing in the weather may be scary, it might be even scarier to realize that Don Julian's family claims that that girl is just a figment of his imagination. To make the story even darker, 50 years after moving to the island, Don Julian was found floating in the canal in the same spot that he claimed to have found the girl. Whatever the real story is about the girl on the island, the legacy of the dolls continues with people who visited the island, saying they believe the dolls come alive at night, moving their limbs, opening their eyes, and whispering to one another. A haunted island full of hanging dolls? Count me out. Number 4. The Hanging Coffins of China. On the side of a cave in a province of southwestern China, 30 caskets are anchored to the limestone rock about 100 feet up in the air. These hanging coffins contained bone fragments, clothing, and ceramics. Found across central China and remote valleys south of the Yangtze River, the coffins are sometimes barely visible from the ground, but they line crevices and cliff faces, balanced or stacked on wooden stakes. The oldest coffin is believed to be 3,000 years old, and similar to the coffins of the SAGADA cliffs in the Philippines, it's believed that the higher the coffins were placed, the more pious the deceased. Others believe that it prevented animals from poaching the bodies, leaving the land below free for farmers to cultivate. Even though this practice is thousands of years old, new sites are still being discovered. In 2015, 131 coffins were discovered in the area. Experts still haven't figured out how ancient people transported the coffin, the body, and the funerary objects to the sides of the cliffs. Some believe they were lowered down from above, while others believe they were raised up to the top via scaffolding. An explorer named Wang Hao Man took an expedition in the year 2000 to get up close to one of these high-rise cemeteries and discovered that many of them rested on rotting sticks of wood and that some even had multiple bodies inside. In some areas, the practice was still underway as recently as 2007, but with some found looted of ancient relics, some locations have taken to putting decoy hanging coffins to satisfy onlookers and keep these ancient relics intact. Number 3. The Crystal Maiden. In Belize, the skeleton of a teenage girl still lies on the cave floor where she was originally found. Known as the Crystal Maiden, the remains of the skeleton were found in 1989 among other ritual sacrifices made to the Mayan gods more than 1,000 years ago. Ranging in age from 1-year-old to adult, many of the bodies showed cranial deformations that elongated them, giving them an alien-like appearance. Almost all the victims were found to have been killed by blunt trauma to the head. Some even had their entire skulls crushed. Although it was difficult to date the skeletons because they were basically cemented to the cave floor by a rocky material called calcite, most of the pottery alongside the body was found to be between 700 and 900 AD, making it likely that that was when the people were also sacrificed. But inside the cave is where the Crystal Maiden was found. 2 of her vertebrae were crushed, and her body was simply lying roughly along the cave floor, leading researchers to believe she died in a violent manner and was tossed or thrown onto the ground where she remained for the last 1,100 years. Her name, the Crystal Maiden, comes from the fact that her body has been there so long that the bones have completely calcified, giving them a sparkling look. Because not much is known about these skeletons, some believe they were put there to appease the god of the underworld. Others still believe that those sacrificed were considered witches and were left in the cage to ensure their spirits were trapped there forever. Whatever the case, the Crystal Cave also has the tradition of being believed to be the entrance to Hell, the domain of the Mayan death god. With so much secrecy and lore surrounding the cave and its inhabitants, if you want to know more about the ancient Mayans and their strange practices, you might want to take a trip to Belize. Number 2. Togo Voodoo Market. Your opinion on the Akodesewa fetish market in Togo probably depends on how you feel about unfamiliar cultural practices like religious animal sacrifices. Located in an area of Africa where voodoo is a widely practiced religion, the market has stalls filled with the severed heads of crocodiles, chimpanzee hands, cobra bones, and other talismans. These items are usually ground up into powder and used in potions that are either ingested or applied to the body to cure ailments. An estimated 30 million people in the Togo region believe in using such items, and that both the physical and unseen worlds are intertwined. For those who are bothered by the sight of such objects, those who practice voodoo tend to have a respect for the animals they use in their rituals and revere them as powerful and sacred. Often, the religious practice involves saying a prayer and cooking and eating the meat. Seen as a sort of pharmacy for the practitioners of the voodoo religion, the market also allows followers and tourists alike to consult the gods directly. In the voodoo religion, there are many different gods, and the people who communicate with them are known as fetish priests. Such a holy person, according to voodoo, will tell normal people the will of the gods. This communication often comes in the form of dreams and conversations between the gods and the fetish priests. In private, secluded locations, such as small huts or shacks, the priests channel the god. It is believed that the ability to communicate with these gods runs in the family, and even though the priests at the market use animal parts in their practice, they try to help, not hurt, and do not use black magic as some may believe. If you happen to be in the region and are curious, you can take a tour of the market for $10, and for an additional fee, you can purchase various charms and receive a diagnosis for any ailments while there. Would you ever buy any talismans to protect yourself from a market like this? Let me know in the comments below. Number 1. Poveglia Island. On an island near Venice, Italy, exiled plague victims and mental patients were once sent off to live out their final days. The place where they passed away became the most haunted location on Earth. The island of Poveglia was once the dumping ground for the diseased, dying, and dead. When the bubonic plague arrived in Venice, the island became a quarantine colony. The Venice government exiled many of those who had symptoms to the island, with most believing it was clearly a death sentence. Those who were too sick and protested being sent there were burned on giant pyres. And in 1630, when the plague again swept the city, sick inhabitants were once again sent to the island. In the late 1800s, the mentally ill were put there to live in a very spooky asylum. It led to some spreading stories and tall tales about strange experiments done on the patients by a doctor who later went insane and threw himself from the bell tower at the facility. As recently as the mid-20th century, geriatric residents were kept at the facility, but now the entire island is abandoned, with locals and tourists prohibited from visiting there. Even local fishermen won't go near the island, believing it's a cursed place. Italian construction crews had started to restore the former hospital in recent years, but after abruptly stopping their work and leaving the island without explanation, many believe the island's dark past continues to plague anyone who steps foot on the cursed ground. The remains of up to 100,000 poor souls are believed to still be on the island. Bones and ashes still litter the ground around the crumbling facilities, with 50% of the soil composed of human ashes. With such a devastating history, it's actually illegal to visit the island, and that's just how the locals want it. When charred bones continue to wash ashore, and some believe they can still hear the tortured screams of the poor souls who ended up there, it's no wonder why Poveglia is off limits. Would you risk it and visit anyway? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.